Good evening, everybody. My name is Todd Scholl. I'm the lead learner at the SCEA Center for Educator Wellness and Learning. I hope you're having a wonderful evening, and thank you so much for being here and participating tonight. I'm really thrilled about tonight's session. We're going to learn so much. Before we do that, I just want to mention to everybody that you can join the SCEA now with no dues until September, and just head on over to jointhescea.org. If you haven't done that, I hope that you'll consider joining our movement to try to create the type of schools that our educators and their students deserve. That's really what we're all about at the SCEA, and the more voices we have speaking together, the more we can get done for you and your students. So without further ado, let me bring in tonight's guest. He is Dr. Mark Wiest. He received a PhD in clinical psychology from Virginia Tech in 1991 after completing his internship at Duke University. He's a professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of South Carolina, go Cox. In 1995, with colleagues from the University of Maryland, he established the National Center for School Mental Health, now in its 26th year supporting this field. He is also a partner on the National Center on Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, pbis.org. He has edited or developed 15 books and is published and presented widely in areas of mental health, education system partnerships, school behavioral health, trauma, violence in youth, evidence-based practice, cognitive behavioral therapy, supporting military families, and advancing policies that support children and youth at local, state, regional, national, and international levels of scale. With colleagues, he currently leads the Southeastern School Behavioral Health Community and is leading or co-leading a number of federally funded studies on strategies to improve SBH or school behavioral health effectiveness, impact, and scaling up. Mark recently received the Faculty Achievement Award from the Southeastern Conference. He was the campus winner from the University of South Carolina. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Mark Wiest. Mark, how are you doing tonight?
Doing great, Todd. I really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for that introduction.
You're welcome. And this is such an important topic. Anybody who's been following the development of our center knows that educator wellness is a top priority for us. We're trying to improve the inner and outer lives of educators, and we use that word inner first intentionally because it starts from the inside. And you and I were talking before we went on and just talking about some of the struggles that really everybody's facing, and educators are also facing incredible challenges to their mental and physical wellness. I'm so excited to learn from you tonight, and I'm just going to turn the stage on over to you and just say thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Todd. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, let's make sure this works. All right, so it's a privilege to be with you. I've been in South Carolina since 2010. Prior to that, I was at the University of Maryland beginning in 1991. Todd mentioned I did my internship at Duke. I was focused on pediatric psychology. I did my dissertation on students with diabetes. So I had no background working in schools. So as a clinical psychologist, I took a job as a professor at University of Maryland, and my first assignment was to work in schools to provide mental health. And since then, in a large high school, Southwestern High School, since then I've been swept up in this very significant national movement to move mental health to where the students are. And South Carolina happens to be a leader in this movement, and we've really expanded this to focus not only improving the health and mental health and school success of students, but also focusing on families and staff as well. So I'm really thrilled to make the connection with you all. I almost didn't do this slide. There's usually too many people to acknowledge, and I probably left somebody out, but the work that we do builds on the work from many others. And so many collaborators who are shaping this field and helping to advance it. And we're also really mutually supportive. So we, for example, steal each other's slides and all that. So if we wanted to make this PowerPoint available, I'd be happy to do that, and you'd be welcome to use it in whatever in whatever way that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Looks like I went the wrong way. So briefly about mental health in schools, then I'm going to get into this context, which, as Todd mentioned, has been very difficult, really, for everyone. It's been difficult for me personally. And then talk some about this interconnected systems framework for school mental health and positive behavioral intervention and support. How do we join those things together? How do we develop these really strong mental health education system partnerships? There's some resources for the ISF that I'll go over. Talk about moving toward holistic approaches, some findings from some of our research, touch on equity issues, present some other networks and resources, and then talk about a new project we're really excited about, the John H. Magill School Behavioral Health Academy. So this is really what totally changed my career. So I was working in Baltimore, helping to direct a program providing mental health in the schools there through school-based health centers. And the program was growing in the early 90s from 4 to 8 to 10 to 25 schools. And back then, Baltimore was really a national leader in this movement. As we opened school-based health centers, we found that rather quickly, the #1 reason for referral was mental health issues in students, because we know that that's consistent with epidemiology, where there are really far more significant mental health concerns among children and adolescents than there are significant physical health concerns. So that was really an impetus to begin to enhance those centers to make sure they're inclusive of mental health staff. So based on that experience in Baltimore and some early research that we had done, we applied for and received a grant to establish a national center for school mental health, which, as Todd mentioned, is still going strong. Back then, there was also a center established at UCLA, and 5 states, interestingly, were funded to build infrastructure for school mental health. You can see those states. And back in '95, I actually interacted with leaders from South Carolina around the things that were happening in this state. And it turns out that that ultimately was really important for me coming here in 2010. And you can see some people, Juanita Evans and Dr. Mike Fishman, were really instrumental in our early development. We were originally a Center for School Mental Health Assistance, and this is me in 1996. I look the same, right, Todd?
Pretty much, yeah. Little bit of gray, a little bit more gray.
Yeah, thank you. Just joking. Actually, the day we got the center, my second son was born, and we almost named him Grant. That's kind of a joke that I tell. His name's Nate, though. And so he's 27, and I've had 27 years of experience, visited 48 states around this agenda, as well as other countries. And this is really taking off, as you mentioned in the intro, and at multiple levels of scale: local, state, regional, national, international. This field is really, really beginning to take off. Some of the reasons for its early growth were these: just incredibly enhanced access. So if you think about all the barriers for a family to get mental health treatment, first you have to identify your child has an issue, then you have to figure out what to do about it, and you have to actually get them there. And then there's wait lists, there's transportation issues, there's insurance problems, there's stigma, which is the #1 barrier to people receiving mental health services. So this construct of developing mental health services in specialty clinics was essentially the wrong construct from the beginning. So there's been this movement with school mental health, part of that movement, to move mental health to where students are. And you can see tremendous benefits also for early identification intervention, especially for students that have less observable issues like depression, anxiety, trauma-related issues. And we frame this in relation to schools, right? So we're trying to reduce and remove barriers to learning and help students be successful in school. But the caveat is when done well. And that's pretty much what I'm going to talk about for a while now, is when done well. And another issue, obviously, is the implementation support. It's become a huge issue in the field. And so we see many school mental health programs that ask, let's say a community mental health center asks a school to partner, and the school says yes, and then the mental health center says, okay, when can we come in? And the school says, whenever you want. And so the clinicians come in Tuesday and Friday, but nobody knows who they are. They're not connected. They're not connected to teams. They have difficulty getting students who are in need. So this issue of a lack of implementation structure has been a really big one. Let me turn briefly to the context, and we've been caught up in this. This was an international webinar that I participated in, organized by people in the Netherlands. And this is March 2021. And if you think, I wish I had kept a diary just from the beginning of March of 20, what we've all been through. And it's been really, really significant for every person. But especially children and youth, young adults. There are data that really suggests that children, youth, young adults have been most impacted by the times that we've been in. And it's not just the pandemic, it's this extreme social divisiveness and other issues. But you see some of these quotes from some of the adolescents: enormous impact, degrading mental health, youth are crumbling, crushed, doing my best to not fall off a cliff, lack of trust in leaders, significant fear of failure. You see these other problems: increased social isolation, loneliness, depression, eating disorder, suicidal ideation, admissions for self-harm. We're seeing every category of mental health issues elevated, and at least a doubling of suicide attempts among young people. I've been really privileged to have a connection to Hawaii, and have been there a number of times, and I've learned about this group, Malama Mental Health, who are young people, high school age, who are really trying to reform and improve the mental health system. These were some of their observations over the summer of 21. People not really acknowledging how much the pandemic has impacted them. Problems with virtual classes, lots of complaints about virtual classes. This issue of lost boundaries between school and home. Lack of breaks and personal time, feeling really busy, really stressed out, deteriorated mental health and health. Confidence has decreased, insecurities have increased, and this trend of people saying we're here for you, but they're not really there for them. So I recommend you check that website out. Some other observations that, there's really very strong evidence for the benefits of in-person versus virtual schooling. There's a link for a report by UNESCO, and we see just tremendous variability in that, and based on schools, district or zip code. This district's virtual, this one's open, this one has both options. Tremendous variability, and often school staff, families, everyone just feeling semi-bewildered with where are we, what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to happen a month from now, are we going to be open? This contact tracing issue was extremely stressful for many schools and districts. Arbitrary and biased decision making. So sometimes in some districts it was actually this building was open, but this one wasn't. And then at the building level, people had the discretion to determine which students could come back. And we saw a fair amount of bias in that decision making. A really big issue that has persisted is we lost a lot of students, and the outreach to them has been insufficient. And then another pattern of students disappearing, coming back, disappearing again. And we also know that when students fail in virtual learning, they're vulnerable, and many of them are unlikely to come back. So we have this outreach press to re-engage with these students, and frankly, we're not doing very well with that outreach. There has been some positives. There's reduced shame around mental health challenges. We're seeing some stigma go down. And again, that's the number one reason why people don't seek mental health is stigma. We're seeing increased transparency, people admitting, I'm struggling, increases in help seeking. The irony there is that sometimes people want to get the help, but lately they can't necessarily get it because there's long wait lists and other things for mental health care. We see in society just an increased urgency to address mental health issues, increased support for school mental health. And we're seeing breaking down boundaries and across disciplines and across systems. to try to better address the needs. And we are seeing breakthroughs in virtual learning and telemental health. And that's a whole nother discussion. For example, in mental health, when is it best? What kind of person, what kind of client is best to have in person? When do people do okay in virtual? Could we do in person for a while and then use virtual as a strategy to help promote the person moving out and becoming independent? There's a lot of knowledge development that needs to happen in this interaction between in-person and virtual mental health care. This is an interesting report. We were sort of shadow authors, some of us from the PBIS National Center, contributing some ideas to this from the US Department of Education. Really excellent report that came out in the fall of 2021 on strategies we should be focusing on within the current context and ways to help students be successful in the current context. And many of these themes are also in that report. A very prominent one, perhaps the most prominent, is the importance of the multi-tiered system of support, right? So the triangle: prevention, promotion, tier 1, early intervention, tier 2, intervention, tier 3, but also focusing on some of these other elements that I've listed there: effective teams, database decision-making, choosing the right evidence-based practices, implementing them, refining them, coaching, providing implementation support, monitoring how students are doing, layering programs together across the tiers, aligning programs, eliminating things that aren't working. So those are all aspects of effective MTSS, or multi-tiered systems of support. And in our view, me and many of my colleagues, positive behavior intervention and support, or PBS, when done well, best operationalizes a really strong MTSS. Without a strong MTSS, it's just a hodgepodge of programming that's not connected together. And another thing that we're seeing is related to all this funding, for example, through the elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund. A lot of schools, states, districts receive significant funds. There's a tendency to just buy something, often from proprietary companies, without the right context or foundation, such as a strong MTSS. And so seeing lots of these programs purchased but never implemented, and that's a big concern. We have significant workforce needs at all levels for school employed mental health staff, such as school psychologists, counselors, social workers, nurses, special educators with behavioral expertise, for community mental health staff at work and schools. We believe that we should also be considering people that don't necessarily have professional degrees, but folks like undergraduate students, students with bachelor's degrees, to come into schools and help us better meet the many, many needs. For example, who are the people to work at tier 1 and tier 2? Often schools don't have those folks. So there's a real need to expand the workforce. We've also seen issues with fly-by-night, internet-based therapy companies recruiting people out of other jobs, offering significantly more money, and people not wanting to leave the comfort of their home where they could do virtual work. So we have workforce needs that I've never encountered in my career. We have this need for mental health literacy. Mental health literacy is relevant for all people. The more anyone knows about mental health, the healthier they are, the more stigma goes down, the more likely they're to seek and receive care. And also it can be therapeutic in and of itself. For example, if you had post-traumatic stress disorder and didn't know, but were having nightmares and were hypervigilant, and then you learn, oh, that's PTSD. That can be very therapeutic, just to learn about mental health issues. Wellness, really important, and really happy to hear about your center, Todd, and it fills such an important need. So the SCEA framework is really important, and you see it a lot in terms of promoting student positive functioning in these domains: social, emotional, behavioral, academic. Given what we've been through, families, students, school staff are really more in the space of social, emotional, behavioral, because that's what's in front of us and that's what we're all experiencing. But at the same time, we have this press of an unprecedented academic slide. We always have that every year. When students leave in May and come back in August, they lose some learning. But we've got an unprecedented academic slide here that for some students is 2 years or so that they have not learned. So how do you have balance where we're focusing on the social emotional behavioral, but also focusing on academic success? And we really need enhanced data infrastructure to understand who has needs. How do we reach out to them? What are the best programs to reach them? How do we address inequities? And how do we use data to fluidly refine programming? And most schools, most districts just don't have adequate infrastructure for the data needs that are in front of us. I'm going to come back to some of those themes. Mental health literacy, as I mentioned, is really, really important. It promotes these things, decreases stigma, promotes help seeking, helps people with wellness. This field is beginning to explode. This is a concept that has not been very popular in the United States. Our friends in Canada have been leading the way for a number of years. This is a program called The Guide from a group at teenmentalhealth.org. That website may have changed, but I know if you go to teenmentalhealth.org, you'll find them. This program, we're actually implementing it in a number of studies, and it's really highly popular, and teachers are implementing it. Teachers enjoy it, the students enjoy it, and we believe it's having therapeutic impacts. This is a newer mental health literacy program called Classroom Wise, which really outstanding that teachers can use to integrate into their pedagogy and curriculum to enhance student knowledge and their own knowledge and family knowledge of mental health concepts that in turn promote mental wellness. And this was developed by the Center for School Mental Health that I helped to develop at University of Maryland, and the Mental Health Technology and Transfer Center network. And the one for us, the MHTTC for us, is based out of Emory, and they have just amazing, Emory University, amazing resources. Now, I want to learn more about your Center for Educator Wellness and Learning, I think is what it's called.
Yes.
Did I get it? Okay.
Yes, you got it.
And we've been focusing on wellness. We actually have some of our team members that are really into wellness, and we're finding that this is really meeting a need and is very popular. So just some of these things, reducing stress, reframing stress, I can handle this, seeking social support. Actually, there are data that when you put those two things together, that when you reframe stress, that you can handle it, and then you go talk to somebody you care about, that actually promotes a positive immune response to put those two things together. We know cell phone and media use of social media has stressed all of us out, but it's having a particularly damaging impact on young people. Being able to create boundaries and get away from cell phones and social media is really important. I know many of my colleagues and myself are struggling with being overwhelmed with too much information all the time. We're just flooded with information. So information management has become a big press. Of course, sleep, mindfulness. For me, a personal thing has been Zen involvement in nature, walking my dogs, exercise, nutrition and supplements, cognitive coping, reframing. I can do this, eliminating negative thoughts, replacing them with positive thoughts, problem solving, things like that. I've been, frankly, and I'll go on record, very disappointed in the federal government that there's not been a campaign around wellness. Where is it? Why have we not had this in front of us? Because we also know that it helps people fight off not get ill, but if they do get ill, to recover.
100%.
Yeah, thank you. And this, back to my friends, Malama Mental Health, some of their recommendations, the ones in asterisk, I had not included. Practice meditation, write down your thoughts, open up to people, stay hydrated, love that one, laugh more, go for a walk, correct your posture, that's a cool one because it actually affects your self-image. Avoid multitasking, love that. Practice forgiveness, cut off toxic relationships, try something new, use your breath, give thanks. Really cool stuff. And given that you have this center, I would recommend you make a connection to that group. So I was in the school mental health field from the beginning, from 91, and I'm getting pretty long in the tooth here as my 32nd year as a professor. And I saw this PBS thing, but didn't know what it was. And then it was exposed to a little bit, but it was complete parallel play with PBIS and school mental health operating separately, different federal funding. PBIS Center funded by the Office of Special Education Programs, I believe in 97, Center for School Mental Health funded from the Health Resources and Service Administration in 95, two separate initiatives. I noticed it in the schools that I was working in, but complete parallel play. Then in around 2008, colleagues who've become close friends, Lucille Eber and Susan Barrett, requested to meet regularly with me and to talk about how could we actually move from two things to two things that were working together toward maybe one thing. And so we've been focused on this interconnected system framework for school mental health and PBIS. How do we create one system? So it's a structure and a process for these two systems to interact in effective and efficient ways, guided by key stakeholders. And I'm going to spend more time on that, but also including the people that have authority. So folks that may be listening, school leaders, superintendents, et cetera. We really need your support in this work. And so it's really complementary. So in the PBIS world, often there's strength in tier one, and it's a great decision-making framework and has strategies for implementation. But often you'll see a lack of depth in tier two, early intervention, and tier three, especially. And at tier three, you may see also a bias toward externalizing problems, but not really seeing the attention to the internalizing issues like depression, anxiety, trauma. As mentioned, school mental health has the poor implementation structure, not really attending as much to issues like fidelity. But when you add the connection, school mental health to PBIS, you really move toward more of a full continuum and greater depth in programming across all the tiers of the MTSS. So we began meeting in 2008. We put out a white paper in 2009, and then we got a group together and we put out this ebook in 2013. And you can find these documents on the pbis.org website. This has been widely viewed, downloaded more than 60,000 times. Provides very practical guidance from school building, district, state levels, how to integrate school mental health and PBIS, how to do database decision-making teams, evidence-based practices, et cetera. So this has been, I think, an important resource for the field. And then another volume came out in 2020, and I really highly recommend this one, which is really focusing on implementation and a lot of tools and resources and guidance for doing the work. Really essential in this is something called a district community leadership team. Think about vertical and horizontal collaboration. So vertical collaboration would be, let's say, state superintendent of education to district superintendents down to the buildings, and then back up, right? So we're tracking what's happening in the buildings at the district level. We're tracking what's happening in the districts at the state level. We're getting best practices up and out, research to practice, practice to research. Really, really critical. But then at each of the levels, we have strong interdisciplinary collaboration, including students and families at each of those levels. And you should have similar leaders, staff, and stakeholders at each of those levels. So you want to see folks like these people, systems leaders, coaches, educators, et cetera. And this is really, we argue that this is an agenda relevant to all groups in a community, because it's about our children, about their learning, about their matriculation, about their graduation, about their success in society. So what group in society wouldn't care about that agenda? So we want to see stakeholder engagement. We want to see really all the stakeholders engaged in this, and having district community leadership teams that look like this with these kind of folks. I won't read all the groups, but also including faith community, business community, groups that may not traditionally be considered for involvement. This is a little busy, this slide, but imagine the DCLT is scanning for resources above, what's happening, what are resources in the state, what's going on in other districts, what's going on regionally, what are national centers offering, getting things down to the buildings through training, coaching, evaluation systems, and in turn tracking what the buildings are doing and getting information up and out. So really, really a critical role in many of our projects. We emphasize these teams, and unfortunately it remains kind of a vision reality gap. We could be doing much better with these DCLTs. And these are just some resources that would be available to you. And again, your organization, Todd, is welcome to post this PowerPoint.
Okay.
Todd, are there any comments or questions that have come
in? Yeah. So one question came up earlier. You were talking about the pandemic, and the question is, how do you balance the safety needs of, when you're in the middle of a pandemic, the safety needs of not, getting everybody together and spreading the virus? Especially, I think people forget that early on we didn't have a vaccine. How do you balance, the needs of students in terms of protecting students in the community at large from a global pandemic, and then also understand that, there's mental health issues going on here when students are going into these virtual spaces and not able to be there in person? How do you balance that? What would be your recommendation on that?
I think that's probably the hardest question someone can answer. I don't have an answer. And I think it's part of the problem is we haven't really had the firm foundation of science to understand this. I still don't think we have. Science has progressed and we have had some innovation that has helped us, but it still feels like we don't have a firm foundation of science, and there's a lot of disagreement in the media, in society, across political affiliations. There's a lot of disagreement. So I apologize, but I just don't have any productive answer.
So the main thing, though, the takeaway that you're saying, though, is that regardless of what the decision is, that we did experience this period where students' mental health went into decline as a result of the pandemic for a variety of reasons.
Right. And to no fault of systems leaders, right? Because we've never experienced anything like this. So I think give the leaders credit for trying to do the best in an ambiguous situation that's very threatening, that doesn't really have the science base to provide the guidance for us. So
another question real quick, and then I'm gonna let you move on, and I've got a few more, but let's just do one more question. So you mentioned social emotional behavioral and then academics, and so there's like SEBA. What are your thoughts? My personal, and I don't mind, like we can share all kinds of opinions here. My personal opinion is we've overemphasized the academic part, overemphasized the testing part, and as at the expense of the social emotional behavioral health of young people, and really even educators. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, when the metrics of success for a school remains on how well students perform on tests, how do you convince school leaders at the state and at the district and local level that they must invest in social emotional behavioral support and not overemphasize academics? And you can feel free to push back on that opinion if you don't agree.
Well, I think it's a both and obviously when students are doing well with their social emotional behavioral functioning, they tend to do better academically, and it works the other way as well, right? So when students are doing better academically, they tend to do better in terms of their social emotional behavioral functioning. I think schools have not been used to taking on so much, and that's understandable. And you hear that from school leaders all the time. We're asked to do so much. and it is a new paradigm to have a more comprehensive approach where we're emphasizing social emotional behavioral. I would think, you know, we really need to ramp up social emotional behavioral and continue to be strong in academics. One anecdote, and I think people relate to this, is if you ask a group of folks in a room, what are some qualities you want to see in high school graduates? You hear things like empathy, interpersonal skills, resilience. You rarely hear strength in calculus, right?
Right.
So some of those soft skills, quote unquote soft skills, I think are really, really critical to success in life. And we need to be paying more attention to them.
All right, fair. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Sure. I thank you for your questions. I'm just going to leave this as a resource. This is in that 2020 version of the ebook. This is like, so imagine in your community, you're tracking what's going on rather than a hodgepodge of all these things that are disconnected. Who's doing what? How can we make connections and do this work together? So sort of initiative mapping is a strategy that would be really helpful at the district level. And, you know, mapping initiatives that are happening in the school buildings, but also what's happening in the community and where can we make connections between the two is really an important strategy. And here's just an example of it where we filled it out some. Aligning programs is really important. Again, we want to move away from this variation of things that are happening in schools. None of them are connected very well together, toward a more coherent system, maybe toward a more simplified system. An example of that is if you're collecting a lot of data that you're not utilizing, then why are you collecting all those data? Or if you're implementing or trying to implement a program that staff and the students don't like, why are you continuing to implement it? Sometimes you see cognitive dissonance, right? I paid $300,000 for this program, you're going to implement it. But sometimes you need to just, you know, take the hit and move on and stop implementing things that aren't working. And these are just some strategies for making decisions about aligning your programming. I won't get into all of them. So school teams, in my opinion, are perhaps the #1 quality indicator for the work. And in most schools, you're going to find just an array of teams, and probably they're not functioning very well. And I often see 3, 4, 5 teams with sometimes the same tired people on them, right? So, you know, and here's an area where you also think about metacognition or thinking about our thinking. Are we starting a meeting on time? Do we have organized agendas? Are the right people in the room? Are we moving through the agenda systematically? Are we beginning the meeting with action items from last time? Are we ending the meeting with action items for the next meeting? Those things are really, really critical. And we're actually working on a monograph now on effective teams, building from, for example, the team-initiated problem-solving program that you can find on pbs.org. That's prominently used in a really good program. The other thing is, if you think about it, you might have, let's say, a tier 1 team, a tier 2 team, a tier 3 team. I personally don't recommend that. It just gets very difficult to manage. So we recommend one strong MTSS team, focusing on social emotional behavioral, but also considering how that is impacting students' academics, analyzing strategies and programming at tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, and making recommendations for ongoing improvement. Also including family members on the teams, critical. We need to really significantly elevate family voice, family and student voice in this work, so that families and students are co-creating educational environments versus really having no voice. And we could spend much more time talking about that. But families and students, older students, should be on the teams as well. And you don't use confidentiality as the reason why not. You talk about data, systems, practices, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And then if you want to have confidential discussions where you're going over lists of students, which has issues in and of itself, then that's the point when families and students can be excused. Don't use confidentiality as a cop-out for not including them. And we really need to, similar to the notion of metacognition, and improve our problem solving from here's the problem, here's the solution, to identify the problem with precision, identify the goal for change, identify solutions, develop an implementation plan, and to continue around that circle, building it all around active use of data. This is another resource that I won't necessarily talk about, but it's in that ebook from 2020 on strategies for a school to actually install the ISF. And these items are focused on, teams. So questions: what teams exist at your schools? What are their roles and responsibilities? Who's involved? How often do they meet? Because one task probably will be to merge some teams. If you have too many, they're not going to be that functional. So if you can merge them to move them toward better functionality, that would really be a step in the right direction. This is a measure to, let's say you have a strong MTSS team that has all the right players: principal, assistant principal, special educator, school counselor, social worker, nurse, psychologist, behavior specialists, families. They complete this at the beginning of the year. They identify some areas for improvement, and then they could complete it at the end of the year to see how they did. And you can see some of the items here. For example, teaming. Do team members collaborate? Do they include education, mental health system representatives, families, and students? Do all team members have professional development training across core systems, features of the ISF, as well as effective intervention practices? So this is a kind of a quality improvement strategy for your teams. Really, there's this need to move toward holistic. So you could take the SEBA framework and make it SHIBA, right? If you add in health, we should be focused on health. We should be focused on exercise, nutrition, reducing screen time, stress management, sleep with our students and families and with our staff. An interesting anecdote is working with some people in motor, and I'll present a slide next. And they said, "Mark, what about motor?" I'm like, "Okay, we'll make it SHEBAM then. We'll add motor at the end and make it SHEBAM." Motor development is absolutely critical at all ages, but especially for young children. And then another colleague said, "Well, what about spirituality?" "Okay, we'll make it SHEBAMs then." So, thank you for laughing when my humor is not working. And this is some work that we're doing around really holistic development. And there's so much work to be done in this. I could talk about this at length, but we don't have time to recommend some of these colleagues from our Department of Psychology, from our College of Education, but also some colleagues from Italy that we're working on a paper that's almost finished. Screening is a big issue that is not being conducted at the level that it should. Most schools conduct screening based on observation. So is the student late? Is the student not coming? Is the student not turning assignments in? Is the student getting in trouble? And based on that, based on those observations, then the student may get referred for more intensive programming, such as at tier 2 or tier 3. When you add a systematic screener, and this is from one of our studies, in one of our studies, this is pre-pandemic, we identified an additional 18.5% of students with needs. So you go from around 10% to around 28%, and around half of these 18% had significant needs that were never identified. And again, back in that category of students with internalizing issues, depression, anxiety, trauma, just not being identified and falling through the cracks. And we know when those students aren't identified early, those problems get worse and expand over time. So it represents a really big missed opportunity when we don't reach out to those students. So infrastructure for screening is a really, really big discussion. Choosing the right screening measures, making sure you have a team equipped to utilize screening data, connecting screening data to actually enhanced care for students really big agenda items. And student needs are really fluid. So if you look, this is from one of the screeners, the behavioral assessment system for children. There are actually subscales where you can look at anxiety, depression, and attention problems, conduct, aggression, and adaptive behavior. And so it's a continuum where we see the students at the top representing about the top 5% that have a lot of issues that often are pretty chronic. And these are students that often need multi-system involvement. And we need to be reaching out and helping these students. But then as you move down to students that have less problems, let's say in the middle, anxiety, depression, and not doing very well with adaptive behavior, and even further than that, anxiety, but fine with adaptive behavior, you're not seeing the programming for these students. These are students that are falling through the cracks. And students move up and down, except for the top group, they're moving up and down on this continuum, often based on what's happening in their lives. So if there's a traumatic event happening in their life, they're moving down, moving up. If there are resilience protective factors happening, they're moving down. But we don't have a fluid system of assessment and intervention. Instead, we have more of a static system, and we label this student's a tier 3 student, this student's a tier 2 student. And we should definitely avoid doing that, because that's just another way of marginalizing students. So this is a study that we had from the National Institute of Justice that operated 2016 to 2020. You can see the collaborators on University of South Carolina, Florida, University of Florida, Medical University of South Carolina. We had 24 schools in 12 in Charleston, 12 near Gainesville, Florida. At each of the sites, the schools were randomized to PBIS only, PBIS plus school mental health, or just drop clinicians in the building and see what happens, or ISF schools. And we had the intervention in place for 2 years. And we're really pleased to see these findings that in ISF schools, we saw school administrators more involved on MTSS teams. We actually saw strengthening of tier 1. We saw more school administrators and clinical staff in team meetings. And we saw better discussion and addressing of school-wide issues in those meetings. We saw more students proactively referred for tier 2 and tier 3 interventions and receiving those interventions. And we actually saw increasing interventions over time for students of color, so an equity advantage. We saw overall reductions in school discipline. You can see this, and we saw reductions in out-of-school suspensions and office discipline referrals for students of color. So this was the first randomized trial of the ISF with some very promising findings. We have a paper about to be published in the Journal of School Psychology, including these findings. We also have some other papers we're working on around school climate and student emotional behavioral impacts. But we're encouraged, and we have a number of other studies going now. Here's another one called Project Rise, Reducing Inequities in School Environments. And it's really about equitable decision-making, and it involves database decision-making for staff, teacher wellness and stress reduction, because we know that when people aren't well or feeling stressed, they're more likely to make biased decisions. Addressing teacher and student unintentional biases, and we all have them. This is not controversial. We don't need to be arguing. This is basic human processing. This is not something from the fringes. These are real scientific issues. So we identify these vulnerable decision-making points, and then we build neutralizing routines. So for example, students are more likely to be disciplined right in the beginning of school, in crowded environments, later in the semester when people are tired, at the end of the day, when there's something disruptive going on, like some school event. So we know when there's going to be more discipline happening, and we need to be alert and controlling our biases and more supportive and making sure we have water and snacks to decrease the likelihood that those biases are going to occur. And so this study is about halfway through Jacksonville, Florida, and going very well. I'm moving toward the finish line, Todd. We could stop and take a couple more comments or questions if there were any.
Yeah. So one sort of comment is, obviously, I think every educator with a heart cares about the social, emotional, behavioral, academic, motor, spiritual, all the physical health, all of the students. I think we all care about that. I think one of the things that some of my colleagues and I have seen is when the educators aren't afforded the time or the resources to take care of their human needs, that this gets implemented. A lot of this stuff gets implemented poorly. In other words, if an educator doesn't know how to de-escalate them or emotionally regulate themselves, is not taking care of themselves physically and mentally and emotionally, then a lot of this stuff doesn't land effectively with students. Do you see that? Do you agree with that? How important is it that we get it right with the adults in the building, if we're going to get it right with the kids in the building?
I think it's of utmost importance. I think teachers, school administrators, school counselors, everyone who works in schools have been among the most stressed out people in the United States the past couple of years. It's a very, very stressful environment. You're trying to do the best for children. You may be dealing with stuff in your own lives. You may be experiencing vicarious trauma with the students that you're working with. It's very, very, very foundational for us to focus on educator wellness. One of the things that we've seen, and it's no criticism because I've noticed it in our own group, is people have just been affected and are kind of depressed and down and lack energy. And so there's been sort of a retreat to the essential. You know, we're gonna do what we have to do, but please don't ask us to do anything else. Unless we can really support our educators and staff in school buildings with wellness and other health promotion, wellness promotion, mental health promotion strategies, there's not going to be much in the well for them in terms of their emotional cognitive abilities. And teaching, you know, it's a hard thing to do. You know, I'm a teacher. My youngest daughter's going to be an elementary school teacher. It's a hard profession, but very, very important profession. And we really need to do a better job of supporting our educators.
Great. Thank you for that.
All right, I can run for a few more and then see if there's questions at the end. So this is just some relevant resources. So the National Center for School Mental Health, they've pivoted to virtual conferences the last few years. There are virtual conferences coming up, so you can learn more about them at that website with that conference in October. Then the PBIS Center, which I'm closely connected to, we're back in person, excited about that in Chicago. This is really a great conference. You can see October 27th and 8th in Chicago. Communities of practice have been really, really critical to our work. Imagine the systematic agenda, let's say, to expand school mental health, school behavioral health in South Carolina rests on top of relationships, right? So we've got to be purposeful about relationship development and building communities of practice where we provide mutual support to one another, and we move from discussion to dialogue to collaboration to resource enhancement to policy change. The power of the group, the power of the collective intellect can't be underscored. And this is really an excellent resource by my friend Joanne Cashman, called Leading by Convening. We're also trying to interact with many different regional networks, so you can see, and these all have great resources: the Midwest PBIS, Mid-Atlantic PBIS, Northeast PBIS, Northwest PBIS networks, all have tremendous resources. I mentioned the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center and the one at Emory. And then we have one, our Southeastern School Behavioral Health Community. So we started out the South Carolina School Behavioral Health Community in 2014. And then actually we met in Columbia in that year, in Charleston in 15, and then moved to Myrtle Beach in 2016. which was associated with a grant from the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. Don't have time to get into the grant, but PCORI emphasized to us, why don't you become regional? So we become regional, and we formally interact with the 12 states in the Southeast with ambassadors from the 11 other states. But we're kind of South Carolina centric in all the work. We're very excited about this. The John H. Magill South Carolina School Behavioral Health Academy. John is a friend of mine and charismatic leader in South Carolina who had led our Department of Mental Health for many years and has been really on the national scene for his leadership in the school mental health area. So we appreciate this opportunity, and Robert Kerr, Kathy Hug, others from our State Department of Health and Human Services providing support for this. So we're running as of July 1. That's our logo. We've got a large amount of funding. We were able to hire 10 new staff. So DHHS has broad mechanisms for schools and community agencies to receive Medicaid funding and at a higher level, while also reducing bureaucratic requirements. The notion is really to prioritize mental health in schools or school behavioral health. So we're developing and deploying an online learning management system. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. And we have coaching in each of our 4 regions, and then reaching down to districts in each of the regions. In this coming 22-23 academic year, we're hoping to work with 3 districts from each of the 4 regions. Let's see, I'm leading this with my friend Sam McQuillan. And so our vision is to strengthen the ability of South Carolina schools and collaborating mental health agencies to broadly promote mental health and enhance school success of students through equipping school and mental health staff to understand mental health issues. And anyone in schools that's interested in this is welcome to participate. Broadly promoting positive mental health for students, families, and staff, and providing the outreach and coaching support that I mentioned. We've got a state-of-the-art training platform. There's a lot of words in this. We're using the Docebo platform. We're building a community of practice. We're identifying and helping folks access a range of relevant resources. And we're hoping to identify exemplary school districts and schools who will embrace this notion of mental health for all, use the learning management system, and become exemplary sites for us to shine a light on them. So the online learning management system, we're in the thick of it now. We've got the mini course, which is almost done. And you can see our title, All Hands on Deck, How Can I Help Schools Navigate the Youth Mental Health Crisis? And that one provides an overview of all of the courses. The first full course is on core MTSS practices, as we've been talking about. The second course is on effective Tier 1 practices, or the promotion, prevention, climate enhancement. Course 3 is on effective Tier 2 practices, such as working in classrooms, identifying students in need, providing early intervention, providing mentoring support. And then Tier 3 is effective treatment. And so DHHS is encouraging school districts to use the platform in relation to being able to access this enhanced funding. So again, we're very, very grateful to DHHS for this opportunity. We're also integrating content related to school safety, crisis management, the opioid fentanyl crisis. We have an addiction expert. This is hitting our state hard. So we will have training for that, how to prevent and respond to that issue. We're also trying to help more staff pursue and obtain and maintain professional licensure in a mental health discipline. And so staff can receive a basic certificate if they do the overview in 2 courses, and an advanced certificate if they do the overview in 3 courses. And then we hope that also connects to, for example, promotion opportunities for staff who are developing this mental health expertise. And we're really encouraging folks, trainees and staff who may be new to school mental health, or staff who want to do a refresher, school employed community staff working in schools as mental health providers. We're encouraging as many of them as possible to take the Tier 3 course. We've got incentives built in. We're using effective adult learning. As mentioned, we're building the communities of practice. We'll be able to track utilization at multiple levels. And again, our goal to identify the exemplary districts and publicize the great work that they're doing. John Magill, I'm deeply honored to be recognized in the establishment of the South Carolina School Behavioral Health Academy, which will equip school and community staff to promote positive mental health and school success for children and youth, and position our state as the clear national leader in effective school mental health. So thank you, John, for that quote. Our conference last year, hybrid, I was telling Todd, we had about 550 in person, 350 virtual. It was a great event. These were our keynotes. We always have a leader from PBS, Tim Lewis, a leader from School Mental Health, Brittany Patterson. We had the Hayden Hurst Foundation, Kathy Hurst, Hayden Hurst's mom, former USC tight end, NFL football player who's had struggles with mental health issues and has become a real champion for mental health promotion. And then if you'd like to join us for our next one, it'll be April 19th to the 21st, 2023 in Myrtle Beach. It's really become an outstanding event. I really appreciate this opportunity. Todd, I don't know if you wanted to do a couple more questions or comments.
Yeah, there's one question, that conference that you just mentioned. What is the cost for that conference?
We try to keep it very reasonable. It's something like $195 or something like that. And we have pre-conference events happening on day one, and then 2 full days of the conference. Pre-conference Wednesday, then 2 full days after. Something like $195.
Okay, and is that, will you be publicizing that like on a website, through social media? And
yes.
Obviously we'll get the information and publicize it, but
yes, if you go on schoolbehavioralhealth.org, you'll find our Southeastern School Behavioral Health community. You can sign up to be on a listserv there. And certainly if we can help you with your work to publicize about your great initiatives, and in turn we can work together to get the word out on some of the important work that's occurring, that would be fantastic.
And that's $195 just for that April 19th through 21st conference, not for any of the other ones, right?
Yeah, that's for that one. Yeah.
Okay, that one. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I do have a couple of, if you have time, I have some tangential questions. Are you okay with that? Like not exactly. Okay. There were questions that came up that are related to this, but not specific to the content. One is, we've seen school violence, Uvalde. We've seen violence in our communities, and a lot of people talking about, how do we address this? How do we effectively get at this? And you've got advocates for gun control. You've got some people saying it's a mental health issue. Some people saying that, well, there's mental health issues in other countries and they don't have these mass shootings. What is your take on that as an expert in this field? If you don't mind sharing what your thoughts are on that. How do we solve it?
I think it builds from something like the district community leadership team, where you have, it's not just the schools alone, but it's schools working with the other youth serving systems and community leaders to develop the best supports to the schools to ensure that they're safe environments. And, threat assessment is really important. Being able to identify when students are beginning to move into zones of risk and dangerous behavior. In most of these school shootings, people knew that there was a student in severe distress, but there was a failure to communicate that. So we really need to work on better identifying signals for students being in distress and promoting safe, welcoming environments for sharing information confidentially about students in distress, so that we can reach out to them with interdisciplinary teams reaching out to these students in need and supporting their needs.
Right.
I could go on, and this is an area where there's some controversy, but I would say that those would be some of the key elements that I would want to emphasize.
Okay. One of the people watching tonight said, how can certified and non-certified educators take advantage of resources? Sometimes districts don't give us opportunities to participate. Is there some type of listserv or to get continuous information?
Yes, I mean, we'll be establishing a listserv for the new academy. So I believe the website SCSBHA.org. There's a placeholder. You can go on there now, and there's a statement. But we're going to be developing that website, so you'll be able to go on that website and sign up for information about the academy. You can go on the schoolbehavioralhealth.org website and ask to be put on the listserv. And we have a listserv of about 20,000.
Wow.
It's regional. There's probably 4,000 or more of those folks that are from South Carolina, though.
Okay. And last question, because I know we're getting past our time and I want to honor that. But last question is, you'd mentioned earlier about social media and technology. What do you think, what role can educators and administrators play in addressing the mental health issues that are created by social media, by the usage of social media has just exploded over the past decade. And clearly there's this strong correlation between utilizing Instagram, Snapchat, that kind of thing, and mental health issues. Can you talk just a little bit about that, and what are some specific strategies we can employ at the school level?
Well, I think for educators to recognize how popular these are, and so come at it not from a do not do this perspective, because students aren't going to listen, but recognize that these things are powerful influences in students' lives, and to acknowledge that, but to encourage limiting use, to encourage definitely limiting use of things that are going to be harmful, to work with teams to address bullying that occurs through social media, to support students who are bullied through social media. It's a really big problem. To emphasize to students that their mental health will be compromised if no question if they're spending too much time on social media, to try to reduce the overall amount of time that they're on social media, and to be able to discern positive versus neutral versus toxic social media, and to try to eliminate all toxic social media. I'm not an expert on that topic. I think some of the younger folks are, but it's a really critical one, and definitely implicates mental health in a really big way.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for your time tonight and for the expertise, and I mean the details that you're getting into in the helping us to implement this and these programs in an effective way, not in this haphazard way that I think we've all kind of recognized the need, and we're kind of grabbing at things. And I appreciate the intention that you're putting behind everything to make sure that there's something that's effective that's being put together at each school, so that we can really address these issues effectively.
Great. And it's really great to meet you. And I hope we can partner together to do some important work.
Absolutely. For those of you watching, thank you for tuning in tonight. If you have any questions, please feel free to continue commenting. We've put a lot of links in the comments, so we'll continue to do that. Dr. Wiest has said he'll send me the copy of the PowerPoint. We'll try to put that and make that publicly available as well. For those who are tuning in, please check out our website, the cool website. That's cewl.us. That's cool.us. You'll be able to find a recording of tonight's webinar, the entire webinar, on the website within the next couple of days. And you can also find all of the webinars and panel discussions that we do housed on that website, along with the podcast and a whole host of other resources for you to explore. And we'd love to hear your ideas. If you have ideas for future webinars or panel discussions, please feel free to reach out to me. And finally, I want to mention the SCEA is such a wonderful organization bringing you tonight's webinar. Without the SCEA, none of this would be happening. And what they were doing in terms of trying to build the types of schools where our educators and students can be mentally well, physically well, socially, emotionally well. That's what we're trying to build. And we would love to have you as a part of that movement. The more of us that there are in the movement, the stronger our voices, so that we can actually move towards those type of schools that humans deserve. And if you are interested in joining us, you can head over to jointhescea.org to learn more. But again, I want to thank Dr. Mark Wiest. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Sounds good. Thank you, Todd. Thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome. And thanks for everybody tuning in. And we'll see you on Thursday's webinar. Kara Lee is going to be talking about trauma-informed practices. That's going to be Thursday night from 7 to 8 o'clock. She was at the USC Upstate Child Protective Training Center and led a lot of trauma-informed trainings with educators there. I think you guys will find that particularly useful and helpful. So hopefully we'll see you Thursday night at 7 o'clock. If not, have a great week. Thanks, everybody.